The trail was already losing light when Wesley Trent's horse stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Stone still in the middle of the rutted road, ears pinned forward, nostrils wide. Wesley touched his hat brim back and looked ahead. Someone was sitting in the road. A woman, sitting in the dirt like she'd been set down there and forgotten. A canvas bag on the ground beside her, tied with twine. No horse. No wagon. No tracks coming from either direction that made any sense. She was just there, the way a person isn't supposed to be. He swung down. She watched him come, but didn't speak. Didn't stand. Didn't reach for anything. Her face was raw with sunburn, lips split, and her eyes had that flat look, the kind he'd seen on horses that had been ridden too hard and too long by someone who didn't care what they broke. "I'll get my horse around you," he said. "You need water." She didn't answer. That was what stopped him. Not the sitting. Not the sunburn. The not asking. A person who needs help and doesn't ask for it has been taught not to, and the teaching wasn't gentle. He pulled the canteen from the saddle and held it out. She took it with both hands. She drank the way a person drinks when they've been rationing, slow, measured, not trusting that more was coming. "Pine Hollow's 6 miles north," he said. "I'm 4 miles south." She wiped her mouth with the back of her wrist and handed the canteen back. "I'll get where I'm going." "Where's that?" She looked at the road ahead of her. Empty road. Nothing on it. "I'll know when I see it." He stood there a moment, the canteen hanging from his hand. He'd ridden this trail 10,000 times. Nothing on it had ever surprised him. She surprised him. The woman was running from something, or towards something that didn't exist, and she'd run out of both directions at once. He thought about getting back on the horse. He thought about what any man with sense would do. Leave her, ride home, bolt the door, mind his own business. A stranger alone on a Wyoming road at dusk was nothing but trouble wearing a different dress. "My name's Wesley Trent," he said. "I've got a house with a table and a stove that works. You're welcome to sit at both." She looked at him the way a horse looks at a hand reaching for its halter, measuring whether the hand is kind or not, deciding in the space of a breath. "I don't have anything to pay you with." "I didn't ask you to." He didn't know what made him say it. Later he'd turn that question over and never find a clean answer. Maybe it was the way she sat in the road, like the road had every right to move through her instead of the other way around. Maybe it was 12 years of eating alone and the particular silence of a table built for two that had only ever held one plate since the summer the house went quiet. Before we go further, wherever you're listening from tonight, whether it's a kitchen in Kansas or a porch in Queensland or somewhere I'll never know the name of, I'm glad you're here. This one's about the people who show up at your door when you've stopped expecting anyone. Go on and tell me in the comments where you're sitting tonight. I read every one. He put her on the horse. She didn't weigh anything. He walked alongside, leading the gelding by the bridle, the canvas bag slung over his shoulder. She didn't speak. He didn't push. A horse that's been handled wrong needs distance before it needs contact, and people aren't much different. The ranch sat in the bend of Spear Creek where the water slowed and spread, willows hanging in it. The cabin built from cottonwood logs his own hands had notched 12 years ago. He'd built it for Martha. She'd never complained about the size. 2 rooms, a loft, a porch that faced east so the mornings came in gold. She'd said the creek's sound was better than any clock. She'd died in that cabin on a night the creek was so quiet you could hear the coyotes 2 ridges away. The boy came too early and went too fast, and the cabin had been quiet since. He set the second plate on the table. He hadn't set a second plate in 12 years. The plate was still there in the cupboard where Martha had kept 3, 2 for them, 1 for company. He'd never moved them. He cooked steak and fried bread, and set the plate down, and she sat across from him, and neither of them ate for a long moment. "Eat," he said. She ate. Slow at first, then like a person who'd forgotten that food was something you could have without earning. He watched her and thought about the gray stallion in the corral. 2 years of gentling in that horse. The cavalry buyer coming in 6 weeks to look at the string he'd bred. That was his world. Horses and patience and the slow building of something worth having. This woman at his table was none of those things. She was an interruption he couldn't explain. She finished. She stood and picked up her plate and his, and carried them to the basin and washed them without being asked. He didn't stop her. A person who needs to earn their keep will do worse than wash dishes if you don't give them something small to hold on to. The knock came after dark. Not on the door. On the porch rail. The sound of knuckles on wood in a particular rhythm. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. Harlan Stowe's knock. Gossett's foreman. A man who cracked his knuckles 1 finger at a time when he was waiting for someone to make a mistake. Wesley opened the door. Stowe stood on the porch, hat in hand, which meant this was official. Evening, Trent. Saw your light. Mr. Gossett sent me to ask. There a woman staying here? Wesley didn't move. There's a woman eating supper at my table. That's all you need to tell him. Stowe put his hat back on. He'll want more than that. He can want what he likes. Stowe left. The sound of his horse on the gravel faded south toward town. Wesley stood in the doorway and listened to it go. The night air smelled of creek water and sage and the last warmth of a day that had already changed everything, though he didn't know it yet. Behind him, Nora stood in the kitchen doorway. She'd heard every word. Her hands were still wet from the dishes, and she was holding them at her sides the way a person holds their hands when they're waiting to be told to leave. He turned. There's a bed in the loft. Clean blankets. I'll be on the porch. Wesley. That was the first time she said his name. It came out rough, like a word she'd been carrying in her mouth too long and didn't quite know how to set down. You don't know me, she said. I know you sat in that road until someone stopped. I know you didn't ask. I know you washed my dishes without me telling you to. He looked at her. That's enough for tonight. She went up to the loft. He sat on the porch and listened to the creak and the horses in the corral and the sound of someone breathing in a house that had forgotten what that sounded like. Harlan Stowe was writing to Leland Gossett right now, and whatever Gossett did with that information would land on this ranch like weather coming over the ridge. You couldn't see it yet. You could feel the air change. The trouble arrived the next morning the way it always arrived in Pine Hollow, wearing Leland Gossett's face. Gossett drove a black-topped buggy with polished brass fittings, the only one in the territory, and he sat in it the way a man sits when he owns the road he's on and every road connecting to it. He was tall, silver-haired, and his clothes fit him the way clothes fit a man who has a tailor on retainer. He owned the general store, the feed and grain, the lumber yard, and the mortgage on Spear Creek Ranch, which he'd carried for 9 years and which came due in 60 days. He was not a man who raised his voice. He didn't have to. Wesley was in the corral working the gray when the buggy came up the drive. The stallion was 4 years old, 17 hands, the color of winter sky, the kind of horse that made cavalry officers sit forward in their saddles. Wesley had bred him from a Mexican dam and a Kentucky sire, 2 years of patience in every inch of that animal. The cavalry buyer, a major from Fort Bridger, was coming in 6 weeks. The sale of the gray and 2 Mares would pay the mortgage and leave enough to carry the ranch through another year. That was the plan. That had always been the plan. Gossett leaned on the corral fence. He watched the gray move for a long moment before he spoke. Fine horse. He'll do. Harlan says you've got company. Wesley didn't look at him. Harlan talks too much. Now, Wesley, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to save you from it. Gossett's voice was unhurried, measured, the kind of voice that made every sentence sound reasonable even when it wasn't. Woman came through Red Falls 3 days ago. The saloon owner there, a man named Phipps, says she broke a contract. Left owing considerable debt. He sent word to the sheriff. Wesley opened the corral gate and let the gray walk. The stallion moved past him, big shoulders rolling, and Wesley's hand found his flank without thinking. A touch that said, I'm here. I see you settle. The horse settled. Wesley closed the gate. What kind of contract, he said. Servitude. 2 years. Room and board against labor. She signed it. A woman signs a paper in a mining camp because she's hungry, and you call that a contract. I call it what the law calls it. Gossett turned his hat in his hands. I'm telling you this because I hold your mortgage, Wesley. 9 years I've carried that note. I've never pressed you. Never raised the rate. That's been Christian of me, and you know it. But if you're harboring someone with a legal attachment in another jurisdiction, that creates complications for me. For my interests. A man in my position can't be seen enabling that kind of thing. There it was. The hand around the throat, dressed up as friendship. Wesley knew the shape of it. He'd been breathing under Gossett's grip for 9 years, telling himself the mortgage was a business arrangement, nothing personal, the way a man tells himself the wolves are just singing. The mortgage comes due in 60 days, Wesley said. It does. And if this woman's still here, you won't renew. Gossett put his hat on. I didn't say that. I said it creates complications. Let the woman go, and there are no complications. You pay what you owe at term, we go on as we have. Simple. Wesley watched the buggy drive away. The dust hung in the morning air. The gray stallion stood beside him, warm against his shoulder. Nora was on the porch. She'd heard. He could tell by the way she stood, arms tight, shoulders drawn up, a woman bracing for the blow she'd learned was always coming. You heard, he said. I heard. He says you owe a man in Red Falls. She looked at the porch boards. His name's Phipps. He runs a saloon and a laundry. I cooked. I cleaned. I mended. He said I owed him for the food and the roof. The debt never went down. I worked 18 months. The number never moved. When I asked to see the ledger, he locked the door. Her voice was flat, practiced. She'd rehearsed this, probably in her own head, 1,000 times. I left in the night. I took nothing that wasn't mine. I took my bag and my mother's book and I walked. Your mother's book? A book of remedies. She was a midwife. She taught me. Nora's hands opened and closed at her sides. I'm not a thief. I'm not what he'd tell you I am. Wesley leaned on the porch rail. He thought about the mortgage, about the gray, about 60 days. He thought about Martha, how she'd have looked at this woman and what she'd have said. Martha would have opened the door wider. Martha never met a stranger she didn't feed first and judge second. Help me with the horses, he said. There's a mare in the south pasture favoring her left foreleg. I want you to look at her. She looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes, fast, bright, gone before it settled. You believe me? I believe a woman who walked out of a locked place with nothing but a book and her mother's name doesn't need me to believe her. She needs a place to stand. He straightened. Come on. The mare first. They walked to the south pasture. The mare was a bay, 7 years old, standing off by herself near the creek. The posture of an animal that doesn't want to be bothered because something hurts. Nora approached her the way Wesley would have, but different, slower, lower, one hand extended, palm up. She didn't reach for the halter. She let the mare come to her. The mare put her nose in Nora's palm. Nora ran her hands down the left foreleg, slow, firm, reading the leg the way a woman reads a letter she already knows by heart. She found it, a heat in the fetlock, swelling above the pastern. It's not a break, she said. She stepped on a stone and driven it into the frog. Infection starting. Needs to be cleaned and packed. If you've got pine tar and some clean cloth, I can do it now. Wesley went to the barn and came back with what she asked for. He watched her work. She was quick without rushing, sure without showing off. She cleaned the wound, packed it, wrapped the foot. The mare stood quiet for her, quieter than she'd stood for Wesley in weeks. They worked through the afternoon. Wesley mending fence, Nora checking the string, the two mares, the yearling colt, the gray stallion who watched everything from the far side of the corral with ears like radar dishes. She found a second problem in the yearling, a case of strangles coming on, the glands already swollen beneath the jaw. She told Wesley what she needed. He got it. She treated it. By evening, the horses were quieter than they'd been in weeks, and Nora's hands were stained with pine tar and iodine and something that looked like peace. They ate at the table again. Steak, beans, fried bread. She didn't wash the dishes this time. He did. She sat on the porch and watched the light drain out of the sky, and he came out and sat beside her, and neither of them said anything for a long time. He was whittling a piece of cedar, a small horse, legs tucked under, the kind of thing he'd started whittling years ago without any plan for what to do with them. There were a dozen of them on the shelf above the stove. He didn't know why he made them. He just did. You don't have to keep me, she said. I know that. Gossett will take this place. He might try. She pulled her knees up. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You owe me nothing. He turned the little cedar horse in his hand. The knife made a thin, clean sound against the grain. I had a wife, he said. Martha. She died having our son. The boy died too. 12 years ago. He said it the way he'd say the creek was dry or the fence needed mending. Flat, factual, something that was true and would keep being true. There was nobody to help her. Nearest doctor was 40 miles. I was a horseman, not a healer. I held her hand and watched her go, and there wasn't a single thing I could do. He set the knife down. A woman who knows how to heal walked up to my door. I'm not going to send her away because a man with a mortgage told me to. Nora was quiet. The creak sounded in the dark. Somewhere out in the corral, the gray stallion nickered, low and soft, talking to the mare beside him. Wesley picked up the knife again. He shaved a thin curl of cedar from the horse's back. A horse that's been handled wrong doesn't forget, he said. But it'll come to your hand if you're consistent. He blew cedar dust off the little horse. Most people give up before the horse does. That's the whole trick, being the one who's still there. The next morning, there was a notice nailed to the post at the Pine Hollow crossroads. Wesley saw it when he rode in for supplies. A printed handbill. Wanted, Nora Kendrick, breach of indentured contract. Last seen Red Falls, Wyoming territory. Owing debt to S. Phipps, proprietor. $200 reward for return. $200. More than a year's wages for most men in Pine Hollow. Enough to make every pair of eyes in the valley look at his ranch and wonder. He pulled the handbill off the post and folded it and put it in his shirt. He rode home. The air over the ridge was moving. You could feel it, the pressure dropping, the world tightening. 60 days. A reward. A mortgage. And a woman at his table who'd walked out of a cage with nothing but her mother's book. Del Wampler's wagon came up the drive that afternoon. Del ran the feed and grain, or he did, before Gossett bought it. Now Del worked for Gossett, which meant Del did what Gossett told him and hated every minute of it. He was a thin man who kept a matchstick between his teeth and talked around it. He unloaded 3 sacks of oats and set them by the barn without being asked. Gossett didn't send these, Del said, the matchstick shifting from one corner of his mouth to the other. I had extra. Figured you might need extra. Del, I know what I'm doing. Don't make a speech about it. He glanced toward the pasture where Nora was leading the mare back to water. She any good with stock? She's good with a lot of things. Del nodded. He climbed back on his wagon. 60 days is a long time, he said. Long enough for weather to change. He clicked the reins, and the wagon rolled back down the drive. And Wesley stood there holding the fence wire and thinking about the matchstick man who'd just risked his livelihood for 3 sacks of oats. Here's a question worth sitting with for a moment. When someone needs help and helping them costs you everything you've built, the house, the land, the life you made from nothing, what do you owe them? Not what the law says. Not what's practical. What do you owe a stranger who sat in your road and didn't ask for anything? Hold that in your mind while I tell you what came next. The sheriff came on a Tuesday. His name was Burl Cameron, and he wore a star that was more suggestion than authority. Pine Hollow was too small for real law, too far from Fort Bridger for military oversight, and Cameron was a man who'd taken the badge because nobody else wanted it. He was decent in the way that most men are decent when nothing's at stake. Something was at stake now. He rode up to the ranch with Harlan Stowe behind him. Stowe was doing the knuckle-cracking thing. Index finger, middle finger, ring finger, the sound of a man warming up for something he'd rather not have to do. Wesley met them on the porch. Nora was inside. He'd told her to stay inside. Sheriff Trent. Cameron dismounted. He was a stocky man with a mustache the color of rust, and he had the look of someone delivering news he wished he didn't have. Got a wire from Red Falls. Man named Phipps filed a complaint. Says a woman named Kendrick broke an indenture contract. He's asking for her return. Wire from Phipps or wire from Gossett? Cameron's jaw tightened. The wire came through Gossett's office. The general store's the only place in town with a telegraph. But the complaint's real, Wesley. Phipps put it in writing. A man puts anything in writing if he's got enough anger and enough paper. That may be, but I've got a handbill that says $200, and that kind of money brings men out of the woodwork. You understand what I'm saying? Wesley understood. $200 could bring half the trappers in the territory to his door. Men who wouldn't ask questions. Men who'd drag a woman off a ranch and call it justice because the paper said so. She's not property, Wesley said. The law says she entered a contract. The law says a lot of things that don't make them right. Cameron looked at Stowe. Stowe looked at the corral. The gray stallion stood at the fence, ears forward, watching everything. I'm giving you 3 days, Cameron said. Either she goes back to Red Falls and settles with Phipps, or I come back with papers. I don't want to do that, Wesley. But I will. They left. Wesley stood on the porch and watched them ride south. The sky was clear, that hard, clean Wyoming blue that goes on forever, and the creek ran below the house, and the horses stood in the corral, and nothing in the world looked like it was closing in. But it was. He could feel it the way you feel a front coming, not in the sky, in the bones. He went inside. Nora was sitting at the table with her mother's book open in front of her. Her hands were shaking. 3 days, she said. You heard. I'll go back. I won't have this man lose his land because of me. You're not going back to that camp. Wesley, you're not going back. He said it the way he said things that were decided, short, certain, no room in it for argument. Then he sat down across from her and put his hands flat on the table, and his voice changed. But I need to think, and I need to ask you something. She waited. Phipps, the man who held you. Did anyone else sign that contract? Any other name on it? A witness, a partner? She shook her head. Just him and me. And a man who was there that day. He drank. He signed anything Phipps put in front of him. What was his name? I don't know. Phipps called him Buck. He was big. Had a scar on his left hand. Old burn. The fingers were curled. Wesley went still. He knew that hand. He'd seen it 2 months ago, in Gossett's store, passing money to Harlan Stowe. A man who drank and signed things and worked odd jobs for whoever paid. And in Pine Hollow, whoever paid was Leland Gossett. He didn't say it aloud. Not yet. He sat with it the way a man sits with a rattlesnake he's found under a porch board. Not moving, not breathing hard, just watching the shape of the thing until he understood it whole. Gossett hadn't just heard about Nora. Gossett had sent the man who witnessed her contract. The wire from Red Falls, the handbill, the sheriff, all of it threaded back to the same set of hands. Gossett wanted Wesley's land. The woman was the lever. If Wesley kept her, Gossett called the mortgage. If Wesley sent her away, the debt still came due in 60 days, and Wesley had no sale to cover it because the horses needed the 6 weeks the cavalry buyer wasn't coming before. Either way, Gossett got the ranch. Nora was never the point. She was the pressure. Wesley looked at Nora across the table. She was watching him the way the gray stallion watched the fence, measuring whether the fence was there to keep him in or keep something else out. How much do you know about horses? He said. I know enough to see they trust you. How much do you know about a horse that's sick? She opened the book. Her mother's handwriting filled the pages. Tight, careful script, remedies and dosages, observations about animals and people and the things that healed both. I know enough, she said. The gray stallion in the corral. He's worth more than this ranch. A cavalry buyer's coming in 6 weeks. If he's sound and he's ready, the sale clears the mortgage and everything else. If he's not sound, Wesley stopped. He colicked last spring. I pulled him through, but he's been off his feet on and off since. Some days he eats. Some days he doesn't. I can't figure why. Nora closed the book. She stood. Show me. They went to the corral. The light was going amber. The gray stood at the far rail, head low, and Wesley watched Nora approach him. Slow, low, one hand out, palm up. The stallion turned his head. He looked at her hand. He looked at her. He put his nose in her palm. She ran her hands over him the way she'd done with the mare, reading him, the heat, the tension, the places where the body holds the things the mind won't say. She spent 20 minutes with him. When she came back to the fence, her face was different, focused, clear, the face of a woman doing the thing she was born to do. It's not his gut, she said. It's his teeth. A molar's come through crooked. He can't chew properly. Some days the grain bothers him, some days it doesn't, depending on what he's eating. He's been losing weight slowly. You probably haven't noticed because you see him every day. Wesley hadn't noticed. Or he'd noticed and hadn't known what he was seeing. 12 years of horses, and he'd missed what a woman with her mother's book found in 20 minutes. Can you fix it? I can file the tooth. I've done it before. He'll need to be sedated. I'll need rope and a twitch and someone strong enough to hold his head. I can hold his head. Then I can fix it. Wesley didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with a lantern and the mortgage papers and the folded handbill, and he laid them out and looked at them the way he looked at a horse he was trying to read, waiting for the thing that didn't fit. The thing that didn't fit was the date on the mortgage. He pulled the papers from the envelope and read them again. 9 years. Gossett had held this mortgage for 9 years. The original term was 5 years. It should have come due 4 years ago. Wesley had gone to Gossett to renegotiate, and Gossett had extended it twice, each time with a smile and a handshake and the language of friendship. But the extensions weren't recorded. They were verbal, and verbal extensions, in Wyoming territory, were worth the paper they weren't written on. Wesley's copy showed the original 5-year term. The due date on his copy was 4 years past. If Gossett's copy showed the same, and it would, because the extensions were never written, then the mortgage had already matured. Gossett could call it at any time. He'd been holding a loaded gun for 4 years and calling it a favor. The door to the loft was open. Nora was standing at the top of the stairs, and he didn't know how long she'd been there. He never wrote down the extensions, she said. Wesley looked at the papers. He looked at her. No. Then the debt's already due. The 60 days is a story he's telling you. The 60 days was a story. The 3 days was a story. All of it, the handbill, the sheriff, the reward, the deadline. Was Gossett building a box around Wesley, making him feel the walls so he wouldn't look for the door? The door was the fact that the mortgage was already matured. If Wesley could prove the original term, the extensions didn't exist in law, and Gossett's right to call the note was already standing, but so was Wesley's right to pay it. At any time. Without Gossett's permission. Without the 60-day story. All he needed was the money. And the money was in a gray stallion's back teeth, waiting for a woman with a file and a steady hand. Nora came down the stairs. She sat across from him. The lantern threw their shadows on the wall. Two shapes, leaning toward each other over a table that had been empty for 12 years. Tomorrow, she said. We fix his teeth tomorrow. And the sheriff? The sheriff can wait. The horse can't. They did it at dawn. Wesley rigged the twitch himself, a loop of soft rope on a short stick, the way his father had taught him, the way his father's father had taught before that. The gray stallion stood in the stocks, and Wesley held the halter and spoke to him in a low voice. Nothing words, just sound, the kind of talking you do to keep an animal from thinking about what's being done to it. The stallion's eyes rolled white at the edges. His weight shifted. Wesley braced. Nora worked. She had a long-handled file, a speculum she'd fashioned from leather and oak, and her mother's book propped open on the fence rail, the relevant page weighted with a stone. She talked while she worked, to the horse, not to Wesley. Low, steady, the sound of a voice that has done this before and knows the animal needs to hear calm more than it needs quiet. The filing took an hour. The tooth was worse than she'd thought. The molar had fractured, leaving a jagged edge that had been cutting the inside of the stallion's cheek for months. Every time the horse ate, the grain pressed the broken tooth into the soft tissue. No wonder he'd been off his feet. No wonder he'd been losing weight. He'd been in pain every day and hadn't known how to say it. Nora filed the edge smooth. She flushed the mouth with salt water. She packed the gum with a poultice of her mother's recipe, slippery elm and honey, and something Wesley didn't recognize, a dried herb she'd brought in her canvas bag from a life that had tried to erase her. When she stepped back, the stallion sighed. A long, full-body exhale that started in his chest and emptied him out. He dropped his head. He stood still. The white stopped showing in his eyes. Wesley released the twitch. The horse turned and bumped his shoulder with his nose, the gesture a horse makes when it recognizes the hand that helped it. Wesley's throat tightened. He put his hand on the stallion's neck and felt the warmth of him, the living heat of a big animal at rest. Nora was leaning on the fence, her hands trembling. Not from the work. From the letting go of something she'd been holding. A fear, maybe, that she couldn't do it, that her mother's knowledge had died with her mother, and she'd been fooling herself all these years to think she still carried it. She'd done it. The knowledge was alive. It lived in her hands. He filled 2 buckets at the creek and carried them to the corral. The gray drank deep. The first time in weeks he'd taken water without hesitating. Wesley soaked a feed bag with bran and mash and hung it on the rail. The stallion walked to it. He ate. He ate the way a horse eats when eating doesn't hurt anymore. Steady, deliberate, his jaw working evenly on both sides. Nora watched from the fence. Her face was doing something complicated, pride and relief and grief. All of them at once. The way they come when you've just done the thing you were born to do and the person who taught you to do it isn't alive to see it. Wesley took the little cedar horse from his pocket. He'd been carrying it. He didn't know why. He'd finished it the night before, sitting on the porch, the last curl of cedar falling from the knife while the creek talked in the dark. It was small enough to fit in a closed hand. The legs were tucked under, the head was down, the tail was smooth against the flank. It looked like the gray stallion at rest. He held it out to her. She took it. She turned it in her fingers. She looked at him. "I made these for my son," he said. "Started them the winter after he was born. Never finished them. After he was gone, I kept making them. Couldn't stop. Didn't have anywhere to put them." He looked at the corral. "That one's the first one I've given away." She closed her hand around it. They sat on the porch in the afternoon sun. The gray stallion was eating again. A second feed bag, empty now, hanging from the rail. The mare Nora had treated the day before was standing sound in the pasture, weight even on all four legs. The yearling's swelling was down. The ranch was quietly, visibly different than it had been 2 days ago, and the difference had a name and a pair of hands and a book of remedies. Wesley. She was turning the cedar horse in her fingers. When the sheriff comes back, I know what I'm going to do. You're going to fight him. I'm going to pay him. He leaned back against the porch post. The mortgage matured 4 years ago. I have the right to pay it any time. Gossett's been telling me 60 days because 60 days feels like a countdown. But the clock already ran out. He just didn't want me to know. And the money? The Grays sound now. You made him sound. I'll send word to Fort Bridger. The major was coming in 6 weeks, but if I tell him the horse is ready early, he might come sooner. A sound gray stallion, 17 hands, bloodline documented. The cavalry pays cash. She looked at him. And if he doesn't come in time, then I'll find another way. But I'm not sending you back to that camp, and I'm not letting Gossett take this ranch by making me afraid of my own mortgage. Nora was quiet. She held the little horse in both hands. You could let me go, she said. If I'm gone, Gossett has no lever. The complaint, the reward, it all falls away. You could keep the ranch and the horses and just go back to how it was. I could. Then why don't you? He looked at her. The sun was behind her, and her face was hard to read, and he didn't try to read it. He said what was true because she'd asked him a direct question and she deserved a direct answer. Because how it wasn't working, he said. 12 years of a table with one plate. 12 years of whittling horses for a boy who'll never hold them. I built this place for Martha, and she's gone. And the place is still standing, but I've been gone from it longer than she ever was. He paused. You walked up to my door, and the first thing you did was wash my dishes. The second thing you did was heal my horse. The third thing you did was tell me the truth about a mortgage I've been too blind to read. I'm not sending you away because a man told me to. I'm not sending you away at all. She was still holding the little horse. Her thumb moved across its back, the same slow, patient motion she'd used on the stallion's neck, the same touch. Reading it. Learning it. My husband, before Phipps, his name was Roy, she said. He died in a mine collapse. Red Falls. 6 years ago. I was 38 years old and alone, and I had nothing but my mother's book, and a man in a saloon told me he'd give me work, and I signed a paper because I was hungry, and the paper became a cage. She wasn't crying. Her voice was steady the way a voice gets steady when the story has been told so many times inside one person's head that it comes out flat. I'm 44 years old. I've been told I'm worthless by 2 men who were wrong about everything else, and I started to believe them. I stopped believing them when I put my hands in that horse's mouth this morning, and he let me fix what was hurting him. Wesley said nothing. He let the silence hold what it needed to hold. She set the little horse on the porch rail between them. My mother used to say you can't heal what won't let you near it. The trick is being the kind of person something stops running from. If you're still here, and I know many of you are, you know what that moment on the porch felt like. 2 people who'd been told by the world that they were used up, sitting side by side, discovering that the very thing the world broke them with was the thing that made them useful to each other. If that's settled somewhere deep in your chest, do me a kindness and tap the like button. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Not because I'm asking, because you want more of this feeling, and I want to keep making it for you. We'll be right back. The sheriff was due tomorrow. The cavalry buyer was a message away. The mortgage papers sat on the kitchen table, and the truth in them was a door Wesley had found but hadn't walked through yet. But the gray stallion was eating. The mare was sound. The little cedar horse sat on the porch rail between 2 people who hadn't known, a week ago, that the other existed. The sun moved behind the ridge, and the air cooled, and Nora picked up the little horse and put it in her pocket and went inside, and Wesley stayed on the porch and listened to the creak and the horses and the sound of someone moving in a house that had forgotten what that sounded like and was remembering it now, slowly, the way everything worth having comes back, not all at once, but steadily, like water finding its level. The sheriff came back on Friday. Wesley was waiting on the porch. He had the mortgage papers in his hand and the folded handbill in his shirt pocket and something else, a receipt, stamped and signed, from the First Territorial Bank of Cheyenne. Cameron rode up alone this time. No Harlan Stowe. The knuckle cracker was absent, and his absence said something about the ground shifting under Gossett's feet. Sheriff Trent. Cameron dismounted. He looked tired. I've got papers from Red Falls. Phipps is pressing the claim. I've got to. Hold on. Wesley handed him the mortgage. Read the date on that. Cameron read it. His eyebrows went up. This term is 5 years. Date of execution is 9 years ago. That's right. Where's the extension? There is no extension. Verbal. Never recorded. Gossett told me he extended it twice. There's nothing on paper. There's nothing in the county records. The mortgage matured 4 years ago. Cameron looked at the papers. He looked at Wesley. If the mortgage matured 4 years ago, then Gossett's right to call the note is already standing. But your right to pay it is also standing. That's why I went to Cheyenne. Wesley handed him the bank receipt. I wired the Territorial Bank 3 days ago. I had enough in savings. Not much, but enough to cover the principal. The bank issued a certified payment to Gossett's account. It cleared yesterday. The mortgage is paid. In full. With interest. Cameron read the receipt twice. You paid it. I paid it. The land's mine. Free and clear. Gossett's got no note to call. The sheriff stood there holding the papers and the receipt, and the morning was quiet around them. Just the creek and the horses and the wind in the willows. Now, Wesley said, about the woman. She's still got a complaint out of Red Falls. She's got a complaint filed by a man named Phipps, witnessed by a man named Buck Torrance, left hand scarred, fingers curled from an old burn. I've seen that man in Pine Hollow. I've seen him in Gossett's store. I've seen him take money from Harlan Stowe. Wesley let that sit. I can't prove what I'm about to say, but I can tell you what I believe. I believe Phipps and Gossett know each other. I believe the complaint was manufactured to put pressure on me. And I believe if you ride to Red Falls and ask Phipps who paid him to file that paper, you'll find the answer wears expensive boots and drives a black-topped buggy. Cameron's face changed. Not dramatically. The way a field changes when the wind shifts. Something in the set of it, something in the eyes. 300 head of cavalry horses have been requisitioned from Fort Bridger this year. Wesley continued. The major there is looking for breeders. I've been breeding that string for 6 years. The gray stallion in my corral is the best horse in this territory. Gossett knew that. He knew the sale would cover the mortgage. That's why he needed me to lose the ranch before the buyer came. You're saying this was about the land. I'm saying it was about the land and the horses. The woman was just the lever. Cameron folded the papers. He put them in his coat. I'll ride to Red Falls, he said. If Phipps's complaint doesn't hold up, if the witness is compromised, if the contract was entered under duress, I'll have the handbill pulled. And Gossett's paid off. You said it yourself, the mortgage cleared. What's he going to do? He's got no note. He's got no claim. If the complaint falls apart, he's got nothing. Cameron put his hat on. He's just a man who owns a store. Wesley watched him ride away. The dust settled. The creek ran. The gray stallion stood at the fence, head up, ears forward, sound and hungry and ready. The cavalry major came 11 days later. He was a lean man with a trimmed beard and the posture of someone who spent most of his waking hours in a saddle. His name was Major Calloway. No relation, he said, amused. And he looked at the gray stallion for exactly 4 minutes before he pulled out his ledger and wrote a number. The number was enough to cover the bank payment Gossett had already received, to buy feed for the winter, to repair the south fence, and to leave a margin that would carry the ranch through the next breeding season. Wesley signed the bill of sale and shook the major's hand, and the gray stallion was led into a cavalry trailer and taken north to Fort Bridger, and the corral was quieter for his absence, and the ranch was safe for the first time in 9 years. Nora stood beside Wesley and watched the trailer go down the drive. She didn't cry. She put her hand on his arm, a small thing, barely a gesture, the kind of touch that means I'm here and nothing more. Gossett didn't come to the ranch again. He didn't need to. There was nothing to come for. The mortgage was paid. The complaint dissolved when Cameron rode to Red Falls and found that Phipps's witness, Buck Torrance, was 3 counties away, drunk in a saloon in Carbon County, and couldn't recall the details of any contract he'd signed. The handbills came down. The $200 reward went uncollected. Gossett's store stayed open. His buggy still drove the roads. But the particular authority he'd held over Spear Creek Ranch, the gentle, friendly, suffocating authority of a man who holds your debt and calls it a favor, was gone. He became what he'd always been underneath, a shopkeeper, a man who sold things. Nothing more. Del Wampler brought oats again the next week. He left them by the barn. The matchstick shifted from one corner of his mouth to the other. Heard the gray sold, he said. He did. Good horse. Best I ever raised. Del nodded. He looked at the house. He looked at the porch, where a woman was hanging herbs to dry in the afternoon sun. Bundles of slippery elm and chamomile, and something purple Wesley couldn't name, strung on twine like a curtain between the house and the world. Del looked at that for a long moment. About time that porch had something growing on it, he said. He drove away. Wesley stood in the yard and watched the herbs swaying in the breeze, and the smell of them came to him on the wind, green and sharp and alive. The smell of someone making a home out of a place that had been a monument to what it had lost. 8 months later, the first foal of the season dropped in the south pasture at dawn. A filly, dark as creek water, long-legged and furious about being alive. Wesley found her standing beside her dam, wet and wobbly and loud. Nora was already there, kneeling in the grass, her hand on the filly's chest, feeling the heartbeat, counting the breaths, the way her mother had taught her. The kitchen table had 2 plates. It had had 2 plates for 7 months. The shelf above the stove held 23 cedar horses now. Wesley still made them, still couldn't stop. And the 23rd was different. It had a second figure beside it, smaller, a woman with her hand on a horse's neck. He'd carved it one evening without saying anything, and set it on the shelf without saying anything, and Nora had seen it the next morning without saying anything, and none of that silence needed filling because the shelf said it all. Nora named the filly Cisco, after the mule her mother had taught her on. Wesley didn't ask why. He knew why. Some names are carried forward because the person who first spoke them earned the right to be remembered each time something new stands up in the grass. The creek ran below the house. The willows hung in it. The herbs dried on the porch in the morning sun. 2 horses stood at the fence. One Wesley had gentled, one Nora had healed, and a woman knelt in the pasture with her hand on a newborn foal, and a man stood on the porch watching her with a coffee cup he hadn't poured for anyone in 12 years. The person sitting across from you doesn't have to be the one you expected, just the one who stayed. The morning came in gold through the east, and somewhere in the grass a filly named after an old mule took her first real steps. And Nora laughed, and the sound of it carried to the porch like creek water, like wind in the willows, like something that had been missing from this place for a very long time, and had finally, quietly, come home. Next time, I'll tell you about a schoolteacher who rode into a town that didn't want one, and the night she had to decide whether to teach the children of the men who'd tried to drive her out, or to leave while she still could. That story's coming soon. Until then, take care of each other. I'll see you back here next time.